So, as Kevin said, the title of my short presentation, it'll be 15 minutes, is how to get your CMO to give a shit about creative operations, which is, there might be some swearing during this presentation. It will not be PG-13. All right. And I'm glad it's being recorded. All right, so as we've been talking about today, and for the last couple of years, because as Kevin mentioned, this is the second or maybe third year we're actually doing the creative operations track here at Henry Stewart. There's been other conferences that have been going on. I was just at one in San Francisco about 3 weeks ago, and I think it speaks to the importance of creative operations. Everyone here in the room gets that. I know for myself, my own experience with creative operations is I met a guy named Mike Monroe, who's here in the audience today, who came in as a VP of Creative Operations at Macy's about 5 or 6 years ago. And back then, there would have been 7 of us in the room, right, talking about creative operations. That's how many people I found on LinkedIn with the title of Creative Operations. And today, there's hundreds. There's a conference all around creative operations, so it's great that it's really grown as a function, as a role, and it's definitely more important organizations today. And one of the things that naturally happens as a function grows is that you want to learn more about it. And part of it is conferences like this coming together. Part of it is let's go and survey that community. So over the last 6 months, our company ConceptShare has done a survey of the creative operations community. We went out, we got 300 people to fill out a survey of what are they doing in their organizations around creative operation? Where are they in terms of people, process, technology, metrics, all the things that we've been talking about today. We also further expanded on that by doing 50 field interviews. So some of you I've actually spent, half a day or a full day with entire creative operations teams, with creative operations leaders. So we got a lot of fascinating results from that. One of the key things that stood out for us is that 38% of creative operations teams think that they are either above average or advanced. So that's good. Above average, advanced is very good. So that definitely is one that stood out for us. And it's basically, we're awesome. We're doing really good at creative operations, and I think, another part of it, again, is there's just more creative ops people. There's conferences like this. There's certainly a lot more people this year than there were last year, and again, that's a really good thing. And as part of those field interviews, and as we started to put the results together and analyze them and dig into the data, one of the people that we wanted to go and talk to before we release the report itself, which is actually being released today, if it gets reviewed and approved on time, is we wanted to talk to your CMOs. I've actually talked to some of the CMOs of the companies represented in this room. You might be going back to a certain message in your inbox. So we went out and we spoke to the CMOs, and they were eager to hear the results, because increasingly CMOs are starting to pay attention to the role of creative operations. Where I'd say it's at today is just where marketing operations was 7, 8, 9 years ago, where the smart CMOs, the ones that were forward thinking about how do we better compete around the marketing function, we're investing into that role of marketing operations. And today, the smart ones, the forward-thinking ones, the ones that think of creative operations as a competitive advantage are starting to do the same thing around this role and function. So we shared the results with them, and 2 things really stood out for them in terms of the reactions that they had to the data. They reacted to a lot of things, but I'll talk about 2 things today. One of them was 51% of creative operations teams said that their number 1 job is to provide project visibility and tracking. That was the number 1 job. Just to make sure that, people had visibility into what was going on and where were things at and things like that. Think of it as my job is to make sure there is a constantly updated Gantt chart or a constantly updated massive spreadsheet, whether it's shared or just printed out and sitting on a wall somewhere in the office. So 51% of creative operations teams right now feel that's their number 1 job. 12% of creative operations teams feel that their number 1 job is to accelerate the creative production process and to drive down jobs. Anyone want to guess what the CMO's reaction to that was? It was, what the fuck? That was their reaction. And when you sit back and you think about it, it's not really all that surprising that that was their reaction. The reaction was, there is a huge disconnect now between what I think I need from creative operations, what I want from creative operations, and what creative operations is actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And part of selling the role, the function, investment into technology of creative operations, we heard a lot today about how do I get more investment for technology, for budget, for things like that. Well, you need to get your CMO to buy into it. He or she is the one with the funds, the ones with the budget, the one that can come and say yes to, I will fund more headcount, I will fund greater investments into technology. But these things really stood out for them, and they said, creative operations is not aligning to what I want. And so we naturally asked the question, well, what do you need from creative operations? How do they better strategically align with you so that when your VP or director of creative operations is sitting in front of you, you are nodding your head yes to the things that they're asking for? So they told us. What the hell happened here? So one is, they said, well, first let me tell you what I'm looking for from creative operations. I'm looking for them to give me content, and we heard about that today, because content to them translates into being able to run more and more campaigns, to be able to do them more and more quickly. And those things translate into dollars. And what does the CMO care about? The CMO increasingly is driven by how much revenue can I produce. That is not a lightning bolt statement. We all understand that. That's what our CMOs want. So what they're looking for is more and more content. But what they want creative operations to do is, I want you to give me more content. We heard a bit about that today. I want you to be able to produce it faster. I want you to be able to do it at a lower cost, because the CMO is not going to get to go to the CFO and say, hey, I think the solution to getting more content and doing it faster is for you to give me more money so I can just simply hire 10x more people. If anybody here is in that position, you are definitely the unicorn in the crowd. So it's about doing more, doing it faster, being able to do it on a lower cost. None of that is about project tracking and visibility. That is certainly something you need to be able to do as a function, as a task, as a job, but it is not the mandate of creative operations. And the other thing that CMO started talking about is, how does creative operations function in a way that they have a bigger marketing impact, so that they're focused on producing not only more content, doing it quicker at a lower cost, but also producing the right content as well. Content that people are going to react to, going to interact with, click on it, go to the website, put stuff in their shopping cart and check out and produce that revenue. There was a very interesting discussion in one of the earlier panels about how do you say no? I think the answer is actually quite simple, but you need to change the way you think about what the job of creative operations is. If now you're thinking about what is the content that is going to produce the marketing results that we care about, that changes the conversation with people requesting that content. Because now you're not just looking at it through the lens of, do we have time for it? Do we have head count? Is there a budget? Things like that. You're looking at it through the lens of, if we do that, is it actually going to have any marketing impact that the CMO cares about? So that's about thinking differently about the job of creative operations. And one of the things that came through loud and clear from these discussions with CMOs as they think about the role of creative operations and how it becomes a critical part of their team and one where they want to grow it out, is they want creative operations to really be the owners of a creative production supply chain. And I would encourage you to internalize that terminology, and that creative operations is no longer the job of project management. I think too many teams have sort of gotten stuck and are spinning their wheels around. My job yesterday was project manager. I went to a conference, I hear this term creative operations. That sounds cool. I'm going to change my title to creative operations, but I'm not doing anything differently. This is different. Putting together a creative production supply chain is different. And I would say today, as a whole, as a community, we're not really playing the game we need to be playing. We're still playing minor league ball, and we need to think about it differently. But the good thing is, there are some of you out there who are creative operations superheroes. You're working in the dark, you're working at the edges, you're like the Batman and the Wonder Womans of the creative operations world. And you're the leaders. You are doing things that are aligning with what the CMO wants. I think about Juliana Vale at Farfetch out in Los Angeles, who was speaking at this conference in San Francisco a few weeks ago. She is perfectly aligned with their CMO strategy. She is approaching the job of creative operations of how do I drive revenue for the business, and not just thinking about it as how do I track things and provide visibility. I think about Heidi Thunberg and the team at Best Buy, where the CMO actually sponsored developing out the creative operations team. And they are actually now peers to the people on the marketing side. And they are actually, when they're responding to requests, they are looking at what is the marketing impact of producing a 30-second video versus doing 10 more email marketing campaigns. So they say no to the 30-second video because they have the data that they've looked at, and they go, sure, that looks cool, and it's fancy, and it'll present really well to the CEO, but it's not actually going to drive visitors to the website, stuff in the shopping cart, and revenue. And they're doing that because they're looking at Google Analytics data and things like that. Again, they think about the job differently. They think about the job as being the CEO of the creative production process. It's not project management. Project management is a critical job. It's a task. It has to be part of your team, but it is not job number one. Job number one is being the CEO of the creative production process, where you are synthesizing the combination of people, process, technology, and metrics to drive that business of creative production forward. And too few of us are doing that today. But some of these leaders, some of these superheroes out there, how are they doing things differently? Well, 40% of people are measuring efficiency. We've heard a lot of talk about metrics. 40% of people are measuring efficiency. 60% are not. So if I'm your CMO, what's my reaction to that? Well, if you're not measuring efficiency, how long it takes you to do things, is it more cost-effective, time-effective to do it internally versus externally? If we're working with a network of agencies, which agency is actually doing things the most efficient way possible? That to me translates into you are wasting my budget. You're not getting the most bang for the buck out of it. And if you're doing that, you can't give me more content to fuel more campaigns. If you're doing that, you're putting deadlines at risk to campaign launch. So my question to you is, if you're really thinking about creative operations being an important, critical, strategic role that's aligned with your CMO and moving forward with them, why aren't 60% of you measuring efficiency? It's great to measure volume, but that's not really going to move you forward and take you to where you need to go. 10% are measuring impact. So it's great that the Batmans and the Wonder Womans are doing that. Again, the superheroes, the folks at the edges. But only 10% are measuring marketing impact. And if you're not measuring marketing impact, then you fall into that trap I think too many creative operations teams are in of how do we say no? Because then it becomes a political argument. It becomes based on relationships. And how do I do trade-offs? Well, maybe I can give them this so I can say no to that. Instead, if you're doing it through the lens of marketing impact, you're on the same page with marketing, and it's no longer about how do I say no, but we should say no because this isn't going to drive the results that the CMO cares about. And you're better aligned with the CMO and your marketing peers, and you're playing a different game. You're elevating the function, the job, the role of creative operations. So when you think about metrics, and I think there's a session coming up on it, which will be fascinating, is you should be measuring and continuously optimizing things that really matter, that are going to drive long-term strategic value. Measuring volume is good. You got to do that. That's building blocks. But you got to quickly move into efficiency. You got to quickly move into impact. And I'm not saying you need to do all these things tomorrow morning. You're not going to be able to do that. But you need to be reframing the job of creative operations and where you want to take it as the CEO of that creative production process. So think about it differently. Process. Process, process, process. If I did a survey right now and said, what do you think the number one job of creative operations is? Process is always at the top of the list. The survey found this out. Every conference that I've gone to, somebody asked the question, and everybody puts up their hand saying process is job number one. That's what we say. What do we actually do? Only 12%, again, the Batmans and the Wonder Womans, are documenting process and regularly re-reviewing it. The approach typically is, we'll sort of figure it out as we go along. And it's a one-time thing. And then we won't look at it again until something breaks and we have a catastrophic issue that comes up. My question to the other 88% of you is, if process is job number one, why isn't it being treated like job number one? This, to me, and I'll use a couple of analogies here, is process is like the operating system of creative operations. It is going to drive what gets done, who does it, when does it happen, how do we do it, and everything else. It's not technology. It is process. It is the operating system. And I think too many of us, 88% apparently, are still working with an operating system that was suitable for your Commodore 64, but doesn't work in a smartphone world. And what's happening is, and I'll switch to a health analogy here, is that plaque is building up in your creative production arteries over time, and you're gonna have a heart attack. A lot of your CMOs are being approached by people that are external and saying, why don't you just outsource everything to us? And your CMO might be listening right now because you're not properly aligning to the CMO strategy and thinking about it as your job as the CEO of the creative production process. 88% are not paying attention to process. But the superheroes are. These are the ones that are aligned with their CMO, the ones that are able to answer yes to, we can produce more, we could do it quicker, we could do it more cost effectively, we can have a bigger marketing impact. Those are the ones that your CMO wants. They're the ones that they're going to hire. They need you to become that for them. So job number one of creative operations leaders is to make process job number one. It's not the fun stuff. It is the stuff where you got to roll up your sleeves, you got to constantly whiteboard the process, you got to measure it qualitatively and quantitatively, and it has got to be an everyday thing. Again, if it's your operating system, you've probably got a ton of bugs in your operating system today. You may not notice them on a day-to-day basis, because you'll sort of work through the fires, you'll work hero hours, and you'll get stuff done, and hey, we're awesome. But eventually, you're gonna have that heart attack, and your system is gonna come to a screeching halt. And then there's gonna be big, catastrophic, dramatic impacts. So process has to be job number one. The superheroes are doing this today, and more of us need to be doing it tomorrow. At least thinking about how do we make that part of our jobs on a day-to-day basis. And that's what the CMO wants. She wants you to be the CEO of the creative production process. That should be a big banner on everybody's office wall when you go back from this conference. My job is to be the CEO of the creative production process. Just start thinking about it differently. My job is not project management. That may be what I need to do on a day-to-day basis until I get funding to build out my team. But start thinking differently about how you start to build out the job and the function of creative operations. And I get that this is all easier said than done. This is a big, bad maze. This is all new. Nobody's done this before. You're not just like doing project management differently and more efficiently and bringing in new technologies. You are reinventing how creative production is working in each one of your organizations. So it's easier said than done. Totally get that. But you need to just start thinking about it differently. And the really cool thing about it, like I personally think this is fun. Those of you that have heard me speak before, I'm a creative operations groupie. I think what you guys are doing is cool because it's all new ground. You're getting to design this from the ground up, but it starts with thinking about it differently. And this is a big infinite world of challenges and also opportunities. If you do this the right way, you're not just better aligning with your CMO, you are activating opportunities that your organization, your CMO, can take advantage of today. Who here has heard their CMO talk about all the amazing investments they've made into big data over the last few years? Like everybody, right? And what is big data? All it's done, it's given them better insight into the marketplace. It allows them to hyper-segment the customer base, to find opportunities they didn't know existed before. So they live in a world of being able to find more and more niche opportunities, being able to do it quicker and quicker, but those opportunities may be there today and gone tomorrow. And for them to take advantage of that, for them to have the content to be able to target those opportunities, they need creative operations to be designed to function in an entirely different way. And if you do that, you're going to be the creative operations superheroes of your organization. So I think it's a huge challenge. It's a huge opportunity. I think a lot of you are just at day one, and it really starts with you got to think about it differently, because the survey says way too many of us are still thinking of this as it's a project management job, and it is not. If that is still your job, God bless you, but start thinking about it differently and moving down the path. Start talking to your CMO differently about what the job and the function of creative operations is, and how if they invest into it, your job is going to be to design a production process, a supply chain approach to it, so you can give them more content, do it quicker, for less cost, or more cost effectively, I should say, and have a bigger marketing impact. And that's how you get your CMO to give a shit about creative operations. All right, thank you very much.